The Xbox brand has a storied history with about as many important contributions to the industry as have had notable blunders, but for me, nothing will ever fascinate me quite as much as the original. Partially because I think the aesthetic of the thing is cool, partially because the best version of multi-platform games that generation were usually the Xbox versions, but mostly because Microsoft had no idea what they were doing at the time. I'll spare you the essays about their botched attempts to court Japanese audiences, or the infamous controllers they originally went with, or the story about their brief attempt to buy Nintendo, and how that went, and skip to the biggest draw of any console, its exclusive game lineup. While the mainstream pretty much just saw the Xbox as a Halo machine, Microsoft put out a lot of games for the thing. In fact, it arguably has the most diverse lineup of first and second party exclusive software of any Xbox. Of course, nobody played any of them, and they've all been lost to time, aside from Halo and Forza, which still go on to this day, and Blink's the Time Sweeper, which is mostly brought up today as a punchline. Blink's wasn't the Xbox's only scrimblow, though. Off the top of my head, there's the actually pretty fun and underrated Voodoo Vince, which actually got a remaster for Xbox One and PC a few years back, a divisive remake of parody scrimblow Conker's Bad Fur Day, and this piece of shit. Perhaps the most notable things about Sneakers are its developers, media.vision, who were responsible for the Wild Arms games under Sony, as well as the fact that despite being published by Microsoft directly, it was released exclusively at Toys R Us, at least in the States, which isn't inherently damning, but sort of implies that the publisher didn't have much faith in it. But what exactly is a Sneakers anyway? Well, essentially, Sneakers is a hide-and-seek simulator. You take control of a group of mice who, throughout the game's 4 levels, have to roam the map finding the many rats hidden throughout them. This might seem like a weird thing to sell as a first-party title, but it's not exactly an awful idea for a game. The issues more so come with how it's all put together. Most notably, you don't have free movement through the environment, and instead the game runs on invisible rails, so the simple act of moving around the world takes significantly more effort than it's worth, especially when some of the rails take you in directions that would not make any reasonable sense to go down. I don't see why they couldn't have just let you explore the worlds freely, especially since the game's already fully 3D rendered anyway. There's nothing satisfying about exploring these environments like this. Compounding this is just how sluggish the process of clicking on a rat is once you find it. It takes 3 steps just for this one simple task, sometimes more if you realize you can't see the damn thing once you get in the search view. Catching a new rat isn't satisfying either because it takes way too long to actually do so. Were this a Wii game, I could see the process being sped up a bit and streamlined, but even with the Xbox, there are a multitude of ways this could have been handled better. It certainly doesn't help the matter the game runs capped at 30 FPS, which is a little weird to me seeing as it doesn't look all that impressive for the Xbox. It's not an ugly looking game per se, the environments look fine and the mice look nice, it just isn't really doing anything to justify the lower performance target. It looks like something ported straight over from the Dreamcast with no visual enhancements beyond, I guess, the fact that it's in progressive scan. Back on the topic at hand though, as the game puts you in control of a group of scrimblows rather than just the one scrimblow, there is some vague attempt to justify this in the gameplay. While most of the rats will just be scattered about waiting for you to just find them, a handful of them will require you to do a few things first to lure them out into the open, and you can send individual mice to perform those tasks, although the game never really incentivizes you to pick any of them in particular. The only thing it affects is which model shows up in the cutscene, once again contributing to how exceedingly slow the game goes. There's also a map, but it's not particularly useful either. It shows you which zone you're in now, which is kinda helpful at times, but it doesn't show you where in the zone you are, how many rats are left in that zone, or well, really much of anything. I really would have liked if it showed the rails you were going on. It gives you a tally of the 4 colored rat groups, but that's not really something that'll help you in any meaningful way unless you end up using a guide, of which there is precisely one online in the form of a long play by someone who apparently only did it as a joke. Every other guide I could find was just left unfinished. Or wait, there is one thing it's pretty much necessary for. After you find all the rats in each group, they all get together in one area of the map for a combat minigame, and the zone it's in gets marked on the map. Like with your own position, it's not marked in any more detail than just, you're in this zone. But it's at least something. But let me just say, for as much as I can complain about the hide-and-seek gameplay, I can at least see someone getting a kick out of it, and I didn't totally hate it. I mean, I hated it, but I didn't totally hate it. Which is more than I can say about the combat. You have basically 2 worthwhile inputs in combat, being punching, which can be charged, and a spin kick, which takes some of your health to use and is only really useful to get out of stun locks. Technically, you also have a guard and a lock-on, but these are fundamentally useless. Pressing X brings up a command mode I could never figure out how to use. It's explained in the manual, supposedly all it really does is let you change the mouse's target and nothing else, but let me be clear and say that I did not find out that it even was a command view until literally writing this sentence, and despite how absolutely dog-ass the game's combat feels, I still had no trouble with any of it until the very last boss, and even then I still got through it with very little hassle. Every enemy is exactly the same, and you use the exact same tactics on every single one of them. Walk over, spin, walk over again, then charge punch them until either they're dead or one of their buddies comes in to break the chain. Repeat this tactic until all the major targets are gone for every fight. This is all I did for the majority of the game, aside from picking up health drops occasionally when I used spin too much. It is piss easy. But it still should be said anyway. Moving around in combat feels shockingly awful. If you make a remotely sharp turn, Apollo just stops dead in his tracks for what seems like no reason, and while the game seems to have more than just 8-directional movement, it definitely doesn't have the full 360 degrees. Your punches also have absolutely no weight. The animation work here just feels very lacking in general. In fact, the whole production just feels shockingly low rent for being a second-party game. Whenever anything but a 1-star Mook is beaten, the action pauses so the camera can show you them squealing in pain and then just fading out, which gets frustrating during bosses when you're just trying to focus on taking out the one singular bad guy you actually need to kill to finish the fight, and your allies that you're ignoring just happen to take out like 3 of their cohorts at the same time. So after all that, is there anything like good about Sneakers? Well, actually it has a pretty solid soundtrack. I mentioned it looks a lot like a Dreamcast game, and the music on display here really accentuates that feeling. It's got a nice sort of poppy jazz vibe to it that does a good job making the game feel like anything other than brain death. It's not a real standout soundtrack or anything, and has some issues like the MIDI horns sometimes sounding a bit crap, but yeah, it's a pretty enjoyable substance that feels wasted on such an aggressively terrible game. I guess the story is alright. It's obviously not something worth playing the game for, but it's far from terrible if you can get past the brain death that is these voices. Oh yeah, this game was also released with no dub, which was almost unheard of in this era. You could chalk it up to this game just kind of being sent out with no fanfare if you want, but part of me wants to believe the localizers just didn't realize these squeaky garbles they were speaking were actually Japanese. I for one didn't notice until I was about halfway through the game, so it wouldn't surprise me. And Yeah, that's about all I have to say on the matter. Bottom line, sneakers is pretty clearly crap, but at the very least, it's interesting. Playing Xbox Classic Nesmix Have a Nice Day is an experience consisting primarily of asking yourself what was going through the game designers' heads when they decided, yes, this is how our video game should be designed. Which I understand sounds like a bad thing, and also is, but at the very least, Sneakers gives you a unique and interesting experience. It is also a piece of shit that I never want to play again. Hey, I got a retro tank, so now the footage is less ass. So yeah, beyond that, I guess, I'm gonna try to, like, get at least one video out a month. I probably won't succeed at that, but I'm gonna try if I can. Just because I want to, like, that seems like an attainable goal at the very least. So, yeah. Again, who knows if I'll actually succeed at that, but, you know, something to work towards. Anyway, see y'all for the next video on something that's hopefully a little better than this game.
I got laid, then I got melody. It seems hot loving makes me write songs. When we walk, you're one step ahead of me. When I sing songs, I'm one step ahead of myself. I got laid.